The barbed wire hummed faintly in the wind. Beyond the fences stretched rows of wooden barracks, their windows dimmed by frost and dust. For the German women inside, nurses pulled from field hospitals, secretaries drafted into army service. Widows accused of aiding the Wehrmacht life in captivity had fallen into a predictable rhythm of hunger, waiting, and suspicion. They whispered to one another that nothing good would come from the Americans. They had been told that their captors were cold, calculating, and ruthless. Many braced themselves each day for harsher treatment, for interrogations, for the gnawing silence of being forgotten. Then, one winter morning in late 1943, the sound of engines broke the monotony. Women rushed to the small windows, some gripping their shawls tighter, expecting soldiers. A column of trucks approached the compound gates, but instead of armored vehicles or military convoys, they bore large white banners marked with the unmistakable Crimson Cross. The guards opened the gates without fanfare, and the trucks rolled in slowly, sunlight glinting off their metal frames. From the cabs stepped not riflemen, but men and women in civilian clothes, American Red Cross volunteers carrying crates in their arms. They were smiling, and that, perhaps, was the first shock. The prisoners pressed closer to the wire, some covering their mouths, unsure whether to believe their eyes. Was this a trick? The stories they had carried from Europe told of prisoners starved, punished, reduced to shadows of themselves. Yet here, the supposed enemy arrived with no weapons, only packages marked medical supplies, food, clothing. The contradiction was almost unbearable. Nurse Hilda Schumann, captured in Tunisia and brought to a camp in Texas, later recalled in her diary, "We stood frozen. The Red Cross came not to judge us, not to scorn us, but to bring aid. I thought my eyes deceived me." That moment, when suspicion collided with the sight of medicine and smiles, marked a rupture in the walls of fear. Some women clutched the wire with trembling hands. Others turned away in confusion, unwilling to show weakness. But deep inside, all felt the same tremor, the recognition that the enemy had chosen compassion over cruelty. The trucks unloaded slowly. Boxes stacked one upon another, each stamped with the same Red Cross. From one crate, glass vials of medicine caught the sunlight, glowing like jewels. Another contained rolls of bandages, clean and white against the dust of the yard. And then came packages wrapped in brown paper parcels of food and small comforts. The prisoners' disbelief only deepened. They had braced for scorn, for reminders of their defeat. But what they faced instead was something disarming, even frightening in its generosity. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And before we move forward, I ask you, wherever you are watching this, what time is it in your part of the world right now, and where are you listening from? Share it in the comments below, because history feels more alive when we know who is gathered together to hear it. That first sight, the Red Cross trucks rolling into a prisoner of war camp in America, was unbelievable. For many of the women, it was the first fracture in the wall of propaganda they had carried with them across an ocean, and in that fracture, light began to seep through. The emblem of the Red Cross was known to the world, but to the German female prisoners who had grown up under Nazi propaganda, its sudden appearance in an American camp felt unreal. They had been taught that America was decadent, careless, and cruel. Yet here stood men and women whose very uniforms, white armbands, stitched with a crimson cross, spoke of neutrality, mercy, and care. It was as if a new face of America had stepped into their lives. One that did not resemble the thunder of bombers or the headlines of military victories, but something far gentler, and perhaps even more powerful. At Camp Swift in Texas, records show the first Red Cross distributions in late 1943. American volunteers unloaded parcels by hand, taking time to speak a few words to the prisoners through interpreters. Some offered a nod. Others managed a smile. These were small gestures, but in the world of captivity, where every kindness was magnified, they were profound. One German nurse, Anna Richter, later scribbled into a confiscated notebook, "The Red Cross woman looked at me as if I was not the enemy. Her eyes did not hold judgment. For the first time since my capture, I felt human again." The United States understood that the Red Cross was more than relief work. It was a mirror held up to the world, projecting an image of a nation that wielded power differently. In Washington, Officials knew these visits were a form of soft diplomacy. Every crate of medical supplies, every box of food sent across the Atlantic, spoke to something deeper, a moral high ground America wished to claim, in a war measured by tanks and aircraft. The Red Cross offered another kind of weapon humanitarianism. Statistics underline the scale. By 1944, the American Red Cross had shipped over 27 million parcels worldwide to Allied and Axis prisoners alike, weighing more than 250,000 tons in total. Each parcel was carefully packed with food, cigarettes, coffee, canned meat, powdered milk, and even chocolate. For German women accustomed to ration cards and shortages, this abundance seemed impossible. More astonishing was the fact that these luxuries were offered without condition. They were not propaganda leaflets, not bribes, simply aid. Around the barracks, gossip spread quickly. Is this real America? One whispered. Another replied, perhaps they only act this way because they know we are women. But the doubt could not erase the truth seen with their own eyes. America had chosen to reveal itself not only through its military might, but also through compassion. For women who had tended to dying soldiers on the front lines, who had seen hunger carve away the faces of comrades. This new face of America was disorienting, even destabilizing. As night fell and the Red Cross trucks departed, the women lingered at the fence, watching until the last taillights disappeared. The barbed wire no longer looked the same. Behind it, they were still captives. But beyond it, America revealed a dimension they had never imagined, a dimension where power was softened by mercy, and where the enemy wore the face of humanity itself. The next morning, the camp buzzed with whispers. Inside the wooden barracks, parcels lay opened on the rough tables. For the first time in months, the smell of chocolate drifted through the stale air. One nurse, Ilse Baumann, who had once worked in a Berlin hospital, held a small bar of Hershey's in her hand as if it were a jewel. She had not tasted real chocolate since 1941. Others cradled bars of soap, carefully sniffing the fresh scent, while a few clutched pencils and writing paper, their minds racing with the possibility of sending words home. Ordinary items, overlooked in peacetime, now became symbols of life. A tin of powdered milk meant strength for a malnourished body. A pack of cigarettes carried not only comfort, but the chance to trade, creating new economies within the camp. A piece of chocolate, melting slowly on the tongue, was more than sweetness. It was proof that someone beyond the barbed wire remembered their humanity. Tears came easily. Hardened women who had endured the chaos of battlefields now wept quietly over soap and stationery. In the flickering light of the barracks stove, one prisoner whispered, "We are enemies, but they still gave us kindness." Her words spread like smoke through the room, repeated in disbelief, then in gratitude. These small gifts carried immense meaning. They disrupted the logic of captivity. The German women had prepared themselves for punishment, for endless deprivation, perhaps even for retribution. Yet instead, they were handed fragments of normal life. The contrast was unbearable and uplifting at once. Official reports confirm the scale of the effort. In 1943 alone, the International Red Cross oversaw the distribution of over 90,000 parcels per month to Axis prisoners in North America. Each parcel was standardized, weighing around 11 pounds, and included not just food but the tools of dignity: razors, combs, writing supplies, though intended for survival. These items touched something deeper: identity. In a diary smuggled through inspection, a German typist named Erika Voss described the moment she received a fountain pen. "I stared at it, unable to move. I remembered my desk in Munich, my work before the war, my father's hands guiding mine as I learned to write. For a moment, the camp walls dissolved, and I was home again." Not all welcomed the parcels without hesitation. Some prisoners argued that accepting these gifts meant betraying the Reich. Others feared that the Red Cross aid was a subtle weapon meant to weaken their resolve. But when hunger gnawed and loneliness pressed down, resistance faltered. Even the most hardened women could not deny the relief of warm socks or a piece of chocolate. That evening, as guards turned down the lanterns, the camp lay wrapped in silence. But within the barracks, women touched their parcels like talismans, holding on to them as if they held not just supplies, but the promise of survival. The shock grew sharper when comparisons reached their minds. Many of the women had relatives or friends imprisoned back in Europe. They knew, or at least suspected. What conditions were like there? Rumors drifted into the camp, harsh barracks in France, starvation in Poland, labor until collapse. They carried memories too, their own nights in field hospitals, men dying on straw mats with no medicine left to give. Against this backdrop, the sight of Red Cross parcels in America seemed not just unexpected, but incomprehensible. One prisoner, Helga Kraus, wrote in a guarded letter later discovered in family archives, "We were prepared to suffer here as our men suffer in Russia. Instead, we receive food and letters. I cannot reconcile these two pictures of war. Why do they show mercy when they do not have to?" The contrast did more than surprise, it eroded faith in old beliefs. These women had been told that America was weak, fractured, incapable of sacrifice. Yet here was a nation capable of feeding not only its own people, but its enemies. The propaganda of scarcity and cruelty collapsed in the face of clean bandages, canned meat, and soap wrapped neatly in paper. Numbers underscored the revelation. By mid-1944, the United States was producing more food and supplies than all of continental Europe combined. Factories in Chicago and Detroit operated 24 hours a day, shipping out not just tanks and planes, but also Red Cross parcels destined for POW camps. A single assembly line could fill tens of thousands of boxes each week for prisoners who had seen German cities reduced to rubble. The sheer scale of American abundance was crushing proof that the Reich could not win. The ideological collapse played out in whispers. Around the bunks, debates broke out at night. Some clung to loyalty. "This is only a mask. They want to humiliate us." Others countered softly, "No, this is real. We cannot deny what we see." Each parcel became a battlefield in itself, between pride and truth. Even the guards noticed the change. Reports from Camp Aliceville in Alabama mentioned German female prisoners growing more subdued after Red Cross visits. Their defiance softened, not because they were broken, but because they were forced to reconcile two worlds, one of promises of German superiority and another of American reality. The contrast became unbearable for some. A nurse named Margaret told a companion one night, "If this is how they treat prisoners, how do they treat their own?" The question lingered, unanswerable, but it carried a quiet weight. It suggested a realization that America's strength lay not only in weapons, but in a social fabric built differently, one where dignity was preserved even in war. As the camp settled under the dark sky, that realization gnawed at them. Their old certainties had cracked. The war was not just being lost on the battlefield, it was being lost in the realm of belief. The shock of material abundance was one thing, but the sight of who delivered it left an even deeper mark. In the camps of Texas, Alabama, and Iowa, the German women often saw white and black Red Cross volunteers working side by side. For women raised in a society steeped in Nazi racial hierarchy, the image was jarring. They had been told that America was a land of chaos, a melting pot doomed to collapse. Instead, they witnessed cooperation that seemed almost impossible under the Reich's rigid order. A diary fragment from nurse Elsa Brandt, preserved after the war, captured the moment a Negro man carried a crate with ease, set it down, and smiled at us as if we were not enemies. A white woman followed him, speaking kindly to a guard. My heart pounded. This picture could never exist in Germany. We had been lied to. The gossip inside the barracks grew restless. Some whispered that the Americans staged it on purpose, a performance to impress. Others argued it was genuine. That equality, however imperfect, lived here in practice, for women who had served a regime that preached purity of blood. This vision of shared labor and shared dignity was disorienting, even threatening. The statistics only deepened the impression. By 1944, nearly 80,000 African Americans served in the Red Cross, the military, and related relief operations. They were cooks, drivers, nurses, orderlies, and sometimes the very people who handed German women their first taste of freedom within captivity. To see this in person was more powerful than any speech. Conversations turned heated. In one bunkhouse, an older secretary scolded the younger women, "Do not be fooled. They want us to envy them." But others could not stop replaying the images in their minds, a black driver handing out milk cartons, a white nurse offering soap, both standing shoulder to shoulder. These were not propaganda posters, they were living contradictions to what the Reich had preached. The Americans seemed to know the effect it created. Not once did the volunteers make speeches about democracy or equality. They let the image itself speak, and perhaps that silence was more persuasive than words could ever be. One evening, as lanterns burned low, a prisoner asked aloud, "If they live like this, what will happen to Germany when our children return and tell these stories?" The barracks fell into silence, each woman feeling the question lodge deep inside. And now, I ask you watching this, what do you think shocked them more, the chocolate and soap, or the sight of equality in action? Share your thoughts in the comments, because history is not only about the past, it is also about the values we measure in our present. By 1944, the rhythm of Red Cross visits had become part of camp life. Yet each arrival still stirred unease, anticipation, and whispered arguments for many German women. The greatest transformation came not during the visits themselves, but in the letters they were allowed to send home, paper envelopes and pencils. Those simple gifts became vessels of truth. Behind carefully chosen words, they slipped hints to families in Munich, Hamburg, or Dresden. We are treated well, we have food, we are not forgotten. These letters traveled across the Atlantic, passing censors and delays, but when they reached Germany, they landed like quiet bombs of revelation. Neighbors who had believed in Allied brutality suddenly read lines describing chocolate bars, medical care, and parcels stamped with the Red Cross. One historian noted that the flow of these letters unsettled even Nazi officials, who feared that such stories undermined propaganda at home. Inside the barracks, the role of messenger weighed heavily. Some women feared being branded traitors for admitting gratitude toward the enemy. Others felt a sense of duty, believing it was their obligation to tell families that mercy existed even in captivity. A nurse named Lotta confessed in her diary, "I did not know which truth to send, should I describe the parcels, or keep silent. In the end, I wrote it plainly. They must know that our enemy is not as we were told." The transformation was not uniform. Some clung stubbornly to suspicion, muttering that the Red Cross gifts were only meant to soften them. But with every visit, with every package opened, more women crossed the invisible threshold from disbelief to reluctant respect. The statistics spoke loudly. By the end of 1945, the Red Cross had delivered over 4 million parcels to Axis prisoners in America alone. Each one carried not just food and soap, but the possibility of altering perception in total. More than 370,000 German POWs, including thousands of women, passed through American camps. Each became a witness. When these women eventually returned home, they carried stories that cut against the grain of defeat. The enemy gave us kindness, they told their families, and in kitchens across post-war Germany, these words challenged the bitterness of loss. They revealed that America's strength had been more than factories and armies. It had been the deliberate choice to treat enemies as human beings. For the women in camp, the realization was sobering. Around the bunks, they spoke of what awaited them after release. "What will we tell our children?" one asked. Another answered, "We must tell them the truth, or else the war will never end." And now, I turn to you. If you were in their place, receiving compassion from the very enemy who destroyed your homeland, would you have trusted it, or would you have resisted? Afraid to betray what you once believed, share your thoughts below. By the time the war edged toward its end, in 1945, the German women in American custody had changed. The first sight of Red Cross trucks had left them stunned. But now those visits became woven into their memory, shaping how they understood both captivity and humanity itself. No longer was the enemy simply a faceless threat. Through parcels, letters, and quiet gestures, the women had encountered an unexpected side of America, one that stood in sharp contrast to the ruins of Europe. Some survivors later gave testimony in oral histories. Nurse Hilde Schumann remembered that the Red Cross brought not only food, but dignity, and that she never forgot the moment she saw black and white volunteers working together for her. That single image had been more powerful than the Reich's speeches. Others, like Erika Voss, carried home diaries filled with gratitude that felt almost dangerous to confess. "I was afraid," she admitted, "that people at home would think I had betrayed them if I spoke too warmly of America." The ideological reversal was profound. Where once they had believed America to be decadent and weak, They now saw a nation strong enough to extend mercy even to its captives. The Red Cross, in this sense, became more than an organization. It was a messenger of civilization. And for women who had been trained to expect brutality, that revelation cut deep, reshaping their sense of right and wrong. Numbers once again tell part of the story. By war's end, more than 500 prisoner of war camps had operated across the United States, housing hundreds of thousands of Germans. Yet compared to Europe, mortality rates among POWs in America were shockingly low. The difference was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate policy, bolstered by Red Cross oversight and a national decision to treat prisoners within the framework of the Geneva Convention. But it is the human moments that endure. A nurse holding a pen and remembering her father's lessons. A secretary biting into her first piece of chocolate in years. A woman behind barbed wire watching two strangers different in skin color, united in purpose, carrying a crate together. These fragments lingered, quietly dismantling years of indoctrination. When the women returned home, their stories did not fit neatly into the bitterness of defeat, yet they told them anyway. At dinner tables in Stuttgart and Cologne, mothers whispered to their children, "The Americans gave us soap, milk, and medicine. They treated us as people." These whispers were seeds, small and fragile, but they carried forward into a post-war Germany that would have to rebuild not only its cities, but its conscience. The Red Cross visits, brief though they were, left a legacy greater than their parcels. They proved that even in war's darkest shadow, mercy could endure, and in the memories of those German women, that mercy became a haunting reminder that America's true strength was never just in weapons, it was in the refusal to strip dignity from the defeated. The story of German women behind American barbed wire, watching Red Cross trucks roll through the gates, is more than a fragment of wartime history. It is a reminder of how unexpected gestures can transform the human heart. These women, shaped by years of propaganda and hardened by the brutality of war, expected punishment and indifference. Instead, they encountered compassion wrapped in brown paper parcels. Each bar of soap, each chocolate square, each letter written home was not merely a gift, but a statement that dignity mattered, even for the defeated, for the United States. These actions carried meaning far beyond the camps. They projected an image of a nation confident enough to show mercy, powerful enough to feed its own and its enemies, and deliberate in choosing a different path from the cycle of vengeance that scarred Europe. In a war remembered for destruction on an industrial scale, the Red Cross stood as a counterpoint, a force of humanity amid steel and fire. The legacy did not end when the women were released. Their memories became living testimonies carried into post-war Germany. Some spoke openly, others in whispers, but all bore witness to the paradox that in the enemy's hands, they had discovered kindness. Those stories, told around dinner tables or written into secret diaries, carried seeds of change. They reminded future generations that strength is not measured only in victories won on battlefields, but in the choice to honor the humanity of others. Today, as we look back from the distance of decades, the image still lingers, a line of trucks marked with red crosses, rolling steadily into a prisoner of war camp, greeted not with cheers or shouts, but with stunned silence. It is an image that invites reflection. What does it mean to be strong? Perhaps, above all, it means the courage to extend dignity where none is expected.